CIA is set to launch secret drone strikes from a new airbase deep in the Sahara Desert.
It was late at night in Ouagadougou when something strange happened. A convoy of unmarked vehicles moved quietly through the capital, headlights dimmed, escorted not by local security, but by heavily armed men speaking English. Hours later, reports circulated that a secret compound on the city's outskirts had been abruptly abandoned. Computers wiped, equipment burned, and foreign operatives vanished without a trace. The official story. Nothing happened, but whispers on the ground told a different tale, that Burkina Faso's young leader, Captain Ibrahim, had discovered and dismantled a clandestine CIA operation right under his nose. And here's the kicker, this wouldn't be the first time Washington, a secretive agency, meddled in Africa. But this time things may not have gone as planned. So what really happened that night? And why are so many convinced? Outmaneuvered one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world? To answer that, we have to go back to the rise of a man the West underestimated, and the dangerous game of power he walked into the moment he seized control. When Captain Ibrahim took power in a sudden coup in September 2022, the world was caught off guard. At just 34 years old, he became the youngest head of state in the world. For some, he was a breath of fresh air. For others, he was a dangerous wild card. Was no career politician. He was a soldier raised in a rural family, educated in geology, and then drawn into the military at a time when Burkina Faso was collapsing under the weight of jihadist insurgencies. Villages burned, thousands fled their homes, and the government seemed powerless. Then came the coup. Swept in, claiming the old leadership had failed. His promise? To fight for sovereignty, expel foreign manipulation, and restore dignity to Burkina Faso. But here's the problem. Whenever a young, charismatic African leader starts talking about independence from Western influence, history shows us that trouble usually follows. Just ask Patrice Lumumba or Thomas Sankara, and that brings us back. 2. Was he destined to become the next African revolutionary silenced by foreign powers? Or was he savvy enough to spot the traps being laid for him? The answer lies in what happened after he rose to power, and to see why the CIA may have gotten involved, we need to look at the bigger game. Stumbled into one that stretches far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. On the surface, Burkina Faso looks like a poor, landlocked nation with little to offer. But that's only half the story. Underneath its soil lie gold reserves that make it one of Africa's top producers, and in a world where global powers are scrambling for resources. Gold isn't just about wealth, it's about leverage. But gold isn't the only card Burkina Faso holds. Its strategic position in West Africa makes it a gatekeeper between the Sahel and coastal states. Whoever influences Burkina Faso gains a foothold in one of the most volatile, resource-rich, and geopolitically contested regions on Earth. This is where the CIA comes in. Washington has long viewed West Africa as both a security concern and a competition zone against not just Russia, but China too. Burkina Faso, started moving away from France and the US, and leaning toward Russia. Joint military deals, Russian advisors on the ground, and a fiery anti-imperialist rhetoric made it clear. Wasn't he playing by Washington's script? That's when rumors began spreading. If the CIA couldn't influence directly, they might find other ways. And one of those ways, according to sources, was a covert operation hidden in plain sight. Now, here's where things get murky. Multiple reports claim that, before and after coup, certain compounds in Ouagadougou and northern Burkina Faso were being used for intelligence activities. Officially, they were training centers or aid coordination hubs. Unofficially, locals whispered they were U.S. intelligence outposts. Eyewitnesses described unmarked aircraft flying in supplies at odd hours, foreigners moving in convoys with tight security, and unusual surveillance equipment mounted on rooftops. If true, this was classic CIA tradecraft. Operate under the cover of development, but maintain networks to gather information, influence politics, and if needed, destabilize leaders who resist. So how did respond? According to insiders, he ordered an abrupt sweep of certain foreign facilities. Soldiers loyal to him stormed compounds, seized documents, and shut down operations. Within days, whatever the CIA had built in Burkina Faso was dismantled. The West said nothing, Silence, and in geopolitics, silence often speaks louder than words. But this raises a bigger question. Why would the CIA care so much about a young leader in a small African country? To answer that, we need to see who was aligning with and why that terrified Washington. One of the boldest moves made after seizing power was embracing Russia. While French troops were expelled from Burkina Faso, Russian military advisors were welcomed in. It wasn't just about guns and training, it was about symbolism. By aligning with Moscow, signaled that Burkina Faso was breaking free from France's long colonial shadow and charting its own path. But for the CIA, this was a nightmare scenario. Washington has spent decades trying to limit Russia's influence in Africa. Yet suddenly, a young African leader with charisma and grassroots support was openly leaning toward the Kremlin. If Burkina Faso became a successful case study, other African nations might follow. And that's exactly what began happening. Mali, Niger, and other Sahel nations started echoing similar moves, rejecting Western influence and turning to Moscow. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. It was about a domino effect across Africa. And for Washington, the prospect of losing Africa's strategic resources and alliances was simply unacceptable. But E's defiance didn't stop at Russia. He also turned his gaze toward another rising power, China. While Russia brought military support, China brought money, lots of it. Began courting Chinese investment in infrastructure, mining, and technology. From railways to energy grids, Beijing offered what Washington couldn't: projects that visibly improved people's lives. For the people of Burkina Faso, this was a lifeline. For the CIA, it was another red flag. Think about it. A leader who kicks out France, embraces Russia, and invites China? That's a nightmare scenario for the US because it signals the decline of Western influence in Africa altogether. And history tells us that leaders who try to break this pattern, whether Sankara, Gaddafi, or Lumumba, rarely last long, which begs the question, was S crackdown on suspected CIA activity simply a defensive move? Or was it an act of survival, knowing full well what had happened to African leaders before him? And this is where the story takes a darker turn, because if these rumors are true, the CIA wasn't just watching. They may have been preparing something far more dangerous. Here's the part most people don't realize. Africa is already a battleground for global intelligence wars. In Niger, US drone bases monitor vast stretches of the Sahel. In Somalia, special operations quietly train and influence local forces. In Libya, covert networks helped shape the fall of Gaddafi. So why would Burkina Faso be any different? For Washington wasn't just a local leader, he was a symbol. If he survived and succeeded, it would inspire a wave of anti-Western movements across Africa. That's not just a problem for France. That's a threat to US dominance. And according to some analysts, that's exactly why the CIA may have been caught running operations inside Burkina Faso. But if that's true, then did something extraordinary. He spotted it, shut it down, and lived to tell the tale, which leads us to the final question: what does this mean for the future? So, did Ibrahim really stop a secret CIA operation in Burkina Faso? We may never know for sure. Officially, the US denies it. Burkina Faso stays silent, and the rumors remain just that, rumors. But here's what we do know. Has defied the odds. He's rejected Western influence, aligned with Russia and China, and inspired a new wave of African sovereignty. If the CIA did try to stop him, they failed, at least for now. And maybe that's the most important part of this story, because whether or not the rumors are true, the idea that a young African leader could stand up to the world's most powerful intelligence agency and survive has already changed the game. The question now is, how long can he keep playing it?